This happened 5 summers ago when I was 15 years old. At the time, I just moved to a new area with my family, being my parents and my brother. We moved into a rural town far from any major cities, and the townspeople were flooded with rednecks and farmers. So one night, I couldn't seem to stay asleep, so I went to the kitchen to get myself a glass of milk. To my surprise, my mother was awake and staring out the window of our lounge, which looked out onto our front garden and the road by our house. "He's here again. He's here again," she kept repeating as she turned to face me. But the way it felt, it didn't look like she was looking at me or even acknowledging my existence. "He's here for you, Martin," she said, and the problem is, my name isn't Martin. In fact, Martin was the name of my parents' firstborn son who had died before turning a year old due to health complications, so it's not like she was just saying some random name. No, she was talking to her deceased baby. I walked into the room to join my mother. Keep in mind it's about 1 a.m., so I can see what she was looking at or what she was referring to. Looking out onto the front garden, I saw nothing out of place, aside from a few long shadows from some trees. There's nobody there," I said to her, but she remained insistent that she could see someone in our garden. Eventually, I sit her down, bring her a glass of milk, and I try to go back to sleep. Over the next few months, my mother's mental health started to decline. It got to the point that her living in our house began posing a danger to not only her, but to all of us. About 6 months after the window incident, I was startled to hear a horrific scream mid-afternoon coming from one of the rooms. Turns out, she had drawn a bath and submerged herself in near boiling water, scalding her entire body up to her neck. After several more incidents, including my mother holding a knife to my younger brother's throat and threatening to sacrifice him to Martin, she was finally institutionalized. I was only 16 years old when this happened, but unfortunately I can only assure you that things got worse. My father refused to let either me or my brother visit my mother whilst she was locked away, saying that he didn't want her to influence us with her paranoia BS. However, this did not mean that I was not contacted by her throughout the whole ordeal. Several weeks after my mother's departure from our home, I awoke one night in a horrible cold, feeling like I was going to vomit. I walked through the dimly lit corridors in our house to the bathroom and switched on the light. I was taken aback when I looked at the mirror, as someone had written, "He is here," on it. At first I thought it was written in blood due to its deep red hue, but later turned out to be lipstick. My mother's lipstick. I was barely able to make a sound before I staggered in my father's room. Stumbling over my words, I was barely capable of providing full sentences to him as I dragged his half-sleepy body across the corridor. Once we got to the bathroom, I had seen that the light was still on, but now the door was closed, with 2 feet casting shadows behind the door. I stood behind my father as he now slowly crept towards the bathroom. Suddenly, we both felt this awful static-like feeling, which made our hairs raise and even made his alarm clock go off in his bedroom. The power in the house instantly died, with a pop noise coming from the bathroom before going dark. My father pushed the door open to find the bathroom somehow empty. By the time I was 17, my mother had unfortunately taken her own life. She somehow had pierced her own arteries when the staff weren't looking and bled out, unable to be revived. Shortly after this happened, my father miraculously was offered a job position across the country, and so we made the decision to pack up and move. Please keep in mind that I was drinking when this happened, but I was only a few beers deep, so I doubt it had any severe changes to my memory. At the time of this, our country had just relaxed their grasp on lockdown measures, so to my friends, this was a time to party. I got a call one day from them saying that they were going to throw a bonfire party that coming weekend and to come down with a 12-pack. Normally I would come up with an excuse to bail, but at this point, I was having relationship troubles and had been locking myself away for 2 months. It was time I got back out there. Fast forward to that Friday night. I arrive with a pack of Modelo, and I'm greeted with what I can only describe as an uproar of cheers. Granted, I'm sure there were a few drinks in by that point, but it made me smile to hearing a whole crowd of people going, "Hey, Anon's here, so glad you made it." Really warmed me up to the idea of getting out of my shell. So I set the beers down into a cooler and make my way into the circle. The bonfire was being held by a large reservoir, so there had to be at least a few dozen, if not 100 people at this party. Everyone was grouped off doing their own thing, whether it be drugs, swimming, dancing, or at the bonfire like I was. As the party continued on, I eventually heard what sounded like Christmas bells jingling, almost like what an elf would hear on their shoes. I finally turn around to face the sound and see a girl coming out from the darkness, from the direction of an empty field. Now, we had a bonfire going, sure, but it seemed like she had just stepped out of complete blackness. No one else was around her, but I just chalked that up to it being so dark. As she steps closer to the fire, the first thing I notice is how pretty she is, like drop-dead gorgeous, a genuine fox 10 out of 10. Her hair seemed sort of messy and it looked like she was wearing pajamas, but somehow she still looked remarkable even though she looked like she had just woken up. Finally, she speaks up and asks what we're all doing, to which we kind of dumbfoundedly tell her that the lockdown's over. "Lockdown? Oh, I was wondering where everyone had gone," she said. My friend offered her a seat next to me, but I couldn't really focus on her beauty anymore. How on earth did she not know about a global lockdown? Eventually, the beer does its job and I'm a lot more confident with her, cracking jokes and complimenting her. She's actually really talkative and incredibly funny, and I start to have that drunk thought of, am I in love? The night continued on, and at one point, I made the worst mistake imaginable. I headbutted her. See, what happened is that I saw this flower next to her and it looked super pretty, and in my drunken stupor I thought it'd be cute to bend over and pluck the flower and give it to her. Except after I plucked it, I quickly rose back up and the back of my head collided with her chin. I shook off the echoing pain in my skull and tried to console her, as I noticed she had covered her face with her hands. I kept apologizing over and over again before taking a moment to notice that the rest of the group had drifted off into their other areas of the party, leaving her and me alone. I continued to apologize as she kept brushing it off before finally lowering her hands. I take a look at her face and, quite frankly, jump back. Her face had this pale exterior to it, almost like a porcelain doll, and I mean, honest to God, it actually did look like porcelain. Had a red blemish on her one cheek, similar to a court jester doll, and had very bright red lipstick. Her face had become bloated, although a part of me keeps saying it was because of the swelling, but it looked like only her cheeks had ballooned up. But the worst part was her eyes. What stared back at me were what appeared to be two black holes, almost hollow. I was terrified, and I was not hiding it whatsoever. She noticed my expression, quickly apologized and put her hands back up to her face, but it looked like she wasn't covering her face but rather trying to push it back into place, like it was a mask. She was this stunning beauty one minute, then some sort of doll-like creature the next. Finally, she lowers her hands and it's her face again, built with a smile. She acts like this didn't just happen and continues trying to have the conversation, but I just sat there, completely dazed and confused. After a few minutes, she gets up and tells everyone that she's leaving, and that's when I realized that only I had seen this occur. Only I had seen her literally remove and fix her face. A couple of people asked if she needed a ride home, but she declined and walked away. After noticing her walking into the field, someone suggested that we should go after her to ensure that she gets home safe, but I outright refuse. Two guys jog after her, but return after a few minutes saying she was nowhere to be found. I eventually sober up and go home, telling everyone I wasn't feeling too well, which I guess wasn't a lie. I was still completely shell-shocked from that experience. The next day I wake up and meet up with